So now we're on Human Rights by Griffin in Chapter 5, My Rights, but Whose Duties? The section 5.1, Griffin wants to look a little bit at Kant's three kinds of obligations, and he thinks that it can be undermined essentially because human rights are more complicated than what Kant was saying. And basically, we've seen Griffin think that human rights, will also have to have a smaller list than what Kant thought it would have, because he's going to start from a different point of view than Kant's notion of freedom. So he's already dealt with Kant a few times. But let's have a look at what he says here. So Kant, three kinds of obligations. Two are perfect, one's imperfect. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. Perfect obligations. That's where, the notion of perfect, nothing missing, right? It's complete. So doesn't mean wonderful, just means perfect, as in, this is a perfect pizza. It doesn't necessarily mean it's wonderful, because you could have a very simple pizza, say it's perfect, and what you mean by that is you shouldn't add anything or take anything away. So something perfect can just mean it's complete for what it is. All right, so what do we mean by a perfect obligation? Well, those who owe, that have the obligation, and those that have the claim or the right, right? So obligations and rights are correlative. They're completely specified. So, so what would this look like? And there's two ways that we can have perfect obligations according to Kant. One is universal and the other is non-universal. So every agent owes to every other person, right? Has the obligation, like a human right, right? So everyone has, every other person has a human right. And so that's the correlative, right, is universal. Everyone has the right to a human. Everyone has a human right. Or if every agent should always tell the truth to everyone else. So everyone would have a correlative right. I have an obligation as an agent to tell the truth. I have an obligation to respect a human right. Whose? Everyone's. And vice versa, of course. So the correlative right is universal. So both the people that owe, that's universal, and the ones that are owed, that's universal as well. So it's completely specified and they're universal. Now, universal doesn't mean completely specified, because you could have a non-universal perfect obligation as well. So what would that look like? Instead of it being universal, we're talking not about every agent and every other person. We're talking about some agents to some others. And in this sense, here's an example that makes it a little bit more clear, I hope. Like if X is an agent, make some promise Z. Like I promise to, come to your, I promise to give you a birthday present, right? I promise to give a birthday present to X, promises a birthday present to Y. Well, that creates a kind of obligation. Y has this correlative, like Y in particular. I didn't promise everybody a birthday present. I promised, you a birthday present, or X promises to Y. So it's a particular agent to another particular agent. So it is definitely a perfect obligation, because the owe and the owed are completely specified, but it's not universal. Like it's not everybody owes you a birthday present, or that everybody owes everybody else a birthday present. Like it's not a human right to a birthday present. Maybe we should stipulate that it should be, but I think that would, to use Griffin's argument, that would cause a lot of moral confusion if you stipulated it. But some agents have some obligation to others. So it's everything specified, but it's not universal. Okay, so that's the notion of perfect obligations. Think about that. Griffin's going to have some problems with all this. The other one is imperfect obligations, and well, that's going to be, naturally, those aren't going to be universal, and they're not going to have these things perfectly specified, right? So in other words, they're not going to be completely specified. You still have the ower, the person with the agent with the obligation, and the one that is owed, but it's really that the one that is owed is not specified. So here it's those who owe is specified, but those owed is not specified. Think about this, just a simple example. We might say something like this, and we often say like this, hey, you should give to charity. And what we mean by that is that everyone out there, you should give to charity. But you wouldn't accept that as an argument that leads to a particular conclusion of a particular charity. For instance, let's say I knock on your door and I say, hey, you should give to charity. I'm a charity, whatever, legit. Let's say it's all legitimate, and I'm out getting money for a particular charity. And then I say, therefore, you have to give to this charity. You'd say, no, I don't. Why? Because I may have and every agent may have an obligation to give to a charity, but the particular charity owed is not specified. So in that sense, all right, well, I just wrote it out here. No particular charity is specified. So there's no correlative right, like there's no particular rights bearer, right? There's just a sense of well, you should give to charity. You should be lots of things we would say that everybody may have an obligation, but there's no particular correlative rights bearer, right? So we can say that there's definitely a direction that the duty forces you to do something in particular at that moment. There is, in many of our duties, there's an element of discretion on part. You can't escape it by just opting out of the whole thing, because then you're not being charitable and you're violating what Kant would say an imperfect duty. But nonetheless, the imperfect duty does not say what exactly you have to do. You have some discretion within the notion of discharging that duty. Here you have no discretion whatsoever, right? If you're obligated, says Kant, to tell the truth, and you tell the truth to everybody. And here would be, well, if you set it up that you turn yourself into an agent who has promised, you've engendered a particular obligation to a particular person, right? I promise you or him or her or whatever, doesn't matter, but everything is, it's a perfect duty because it's completely specified. Here, there's an openness and so a discretion. So this notion of an openness, well, Griffin says if human rights are not just negative rights, but actually positive rights, they're not just rights from, like sort of in the old-fashioned way, like a right to life was, just a right not to be arbitrarily killed. But if you say, well, no, a positive notion of a right to life is going to be more than just freedom from being arbitrarily killed to, food or something that people are obligated to give. Right? You have a more complex notion of a right. It's a positive right. And Griffin holds that if human rights are not just negative but positive rights, then the question of the obligation bearer is not so simple, right? Because you can think about this. If human rights are going to include positive things, like it's a human right to be tried in a decent court system. Okay, let's say that is, just for the sake of discussion, a human right. Well, you're the rights bearer, or I am, or you're being tried. You say, I want to be tried in a good court system. Who's obligated to provide that court system? So, like, if I'm being tried, I couldn't say, well, you are obligated to provide that court system, because, well, I don't think the average person could fund a court system and run one. So where does the nature of the obligation lie? So in this sense, that you can have somebody who's owed, that is that is specified, right? So it's kind of the reverse of this one. That somebody who's owed is like I'm owed as a positive right, the right to be tried in a good court. But again, who's the one who owed is not specified. It's not clear. So he thinks that this obligation bearer is not simple, and this whole system is undermined, because the question of human rights is going to ultimately say, my rights, but who's responsible? So this chapter will deal with the thorny question of saying, well, it's one thing to say that you have, if we clarify, yeah, you have a human right, and that's going to include X, Y, and Z. The question still remains of how to complete this notion of, well, who bears the obligation, right? You have the right, but who has the duty to answer to that rights claim that you make? Stay tuned.